Namaste nerds, this is Navinad, the Budget Pub Stomper, and today we're going to be talking about Celes, the Night Runer. This is my deck, Celeste Ruin the Night Budget Edition. We're going to be talking about this Final Fantasy Broad here. Now, I'm really excited about this commander, and I have been since the second I saw it. Like, when this was spoiled, it was the first time I ever got on my little phone group chat and called dibs to all of my CDH and budget competitive nerd homies. And I had this idea at a glance that she was going to be sort of like a Mardu version of Plagon. That's what I thought the deck was going to be like. And I tried building that version of the deck and kind of ran my head into that wall for a bit too long until I came upon what I think she really is. And we're going to get into that momentarily. First, let's read the card. Celeste Rune Knight. She's a Mardu, so for 4 mana, Mardu and 1. She's a 4/4 legendary creature, human wizard knight. When Celeste enters, you're going to discard as many cards as you'd like. Discard any number of cards in your hand, and you draw that many cards plus 1. Then this bottom text, which I wasn't paying enough attention to, says whenever one or more other creatures you control enter, if one or more of them entered from a graveyard or was cast from a graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So when I first saw it, I thought she was going to be kind of like a mix between Plagon, that Azorius card draw commander that you just kind of play and flicker and reflicker, draw a bunch of cards and struggle to find a way to win because you're an Azorius. I thought she was going to be kind of a cross between that and that dragon lizard, the lizard thing, Skrev. Thought it would be and I mean, text-wise, she kind of is like that. And my second train of thought was too bad she's not in Jund, because then we could do food chain stuff, and I thought she'd be a sick food chain commander. But it turns out that there is sort of like a version of food chain that we can do with Celeste. Anyway, I plan on building this in CDH. I think there's been a lot of commanders that have entered the zeitgeist as of late, the CDH zeitgeist, where people have been really stoked about them and then disappointed. And then a new one comes out and stoked and disappointed. And I actually think this is going to be the same. I don't think it's going to be the same. It's not playing the way I expected it to play. But there's some really broken and brutal things that we can do with her, even at a $100 budget. And I guess so, without ruining anybody else's night, without further ado, let's just get into it. So the first thing I like to do usually is I talk about the commander and then how we're going to win the game. And so how we're going to win the game, the combo lines. So it should be obvious that she is going to work really well with Underworld Breach, and she works really well with your Twin Flame type spells. And so that was my draw to her, was, if you're playing in a Mardu deck and you're trying to be competitive, you're probably going to end the game with Dualmaster? You're not going to use Dualmaster. You're probably going to be using Twin Flame Dualcaster Mage combos. At least it's going to be one of the ways that you try to win the game. And you're probably going to be playing Underworld Breach. And both of those things are true in even this $100 deck. Not in small part thanks to the recent reprint of Underworld Breach, which has it sitting at about $8. Buy yours now. They're not going to stay like this forever, would be my advice. Not financial. Yeah, no, it's financial. Obviously, it's financial advice, right? So let's talk about the win cons. We've got this, whenever one or more other creatures enters, it gets a +1/+1 counter, or you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So obviously that makes it a combo enabler for any of the Persist combos, and we're going to talk about those. And because anytime it ETBs, gets flickered, gets twin cast, gets sawed in half, you're going to get to repeat the ETB of discarding any number of cards and then drawing that many cards +1. And so that's going to make it work really well with Breach, and it's going to turn some of our quasi-dead cards that we usually use to win the game with the Dualcaster Twin Flame line into actual functional cards in the deck. So the the main win lines are going to be, and this was the thing I didn't catch at first, but ends up, I think, becoming like more or less Celeste, at least my version of Celeste's kind of deck's identity, is her synergy and interaction with World Gorger Dragon. Now, World Gorger Dragon is a combo type that has fallen out of favor with CDH players. And no wonder, right? You get blown out by this one time and you get PTSD and you can never look at another World Gorger Dragon. But what used to be the case is it used to be all these World Gorger Outlet or World Gorger Synergy commanders were Rakdos. And without having blue and without having white, this becomes a pretty dangerous little game you're playing with World Gorger Dragon. But when you have access to either blue or white, it gets a lot more safe. You get to play your silence effects, grand abolishers, so on. But the main thing about having this crazy synergy with World Gorger Dragon is that even at $100, you could potentially win the game on turn 1 and pretty easily on turn 2. But we'll get into that. So the main win lines: Dualcaster Mage and Twin Flame. The problem normally with the Dualcaster Twin Flame line, putting it as your win condition in a deck, is that Twin Flame doesn't do anything with a lot of decks. Now, I went out of my way to play some creatures that had ETBs so that Twin Flaming them or Heat Shimmering them or Electro Duplicating them is not bad. It can be kind of a good thing. So, in case you're not familiar, Dualcaster Mage is this lovely red gent that's been hanging out on the screen here for a bit, is also a human wizard. It is a 3-mana, 2/2 flash human wizard, and it says when DCM enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now, Twin Flame, I don't know if we're even on legit Twin Flame. We are indeed. Twin Flame is a 2-mana sorcery that says choose any number of target creatures you control, make a token copy of that creature. It gains haste, and then you're gonna exile it. You're gonna exile it at the beginning of your next end step. So, if we use a Electro Duplicate or Twin Flame, any of these Twin Flame type cards, and Dualcaster Mage, so what that's going to look like is we'll have any creature in play. Let's say we've got an Imperial Recruiter in play. That's how we found our Dualcaster Mage. Imperial Recruiter recruited for our Dualcaster Mage. Now we're going to cast our Twin Flame, and we're not going to hold priority. So before anybody else has a chance to do anything, we're going to say Twin Flame, holding priority. I will now cast Dualcaster Mage. So the Twin Flame will be targeting Imperial Recruiter, just for example. And then the Dualcaster Mage will get flashed in, copying the Twin Flame. So now we're going to have a stack where we've got the Twin Flame, and then we've got a Dualcaster Mage on top of the Twin Flame. Then we're going to make a copy of the Twin Flame, and that copy will go on top of the Dualcaster Mage. So that's going to make a copy of a Dualcaster Mage, and that copy of the Dualcaster Mage will go on the top of the stack and make a copy of the Twin Flame, which will copy the Dualcaster Mage, which will copy the Twin Flame. So on and so forth, ad infinitum, until you've made a billion 2/2 hasty Dualcaster Mages. So that's the probably the way you're going to end the game most of the time with this deck, or at least a good chunk of the time with this deck. That is plan A, maybe. I mean, that's not how we're actually planning to get there. We don't just tutor up Dualcaster Mage and then tutor up Twin Flame. We don't just hope to draw into them. But I guess we'll say that's going to deal the death punch the majority of the time in the deck. Now, some other ways to deal the death blow. We've got this ability at the bottom that says whenever a creature enters, when you cast a creature or bring a creature back from the graveyard into play, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Now we've got these Persist creatures that say When this creature dies, if it didn't have a neg1 counter, return it to the battlefield and put a neg1 counter on it. But if it gets returned to the battlefield and you've got your commander in play, the commander says put a +1/+1 counter on it. Well, the text says put a neg1 counter, and her text says put a +1 counter. So the counters cancel each other out. And that means that if you can find a way to sacrifice your putrid goblin, for instance, which is a goblin, so let's just say you used your goblin matron to tutor up your putrid goblin. Or you had the goblin and you use your goblin matron to tutor up your skirk prospector. You put your skirk prospector in play and you cast your putrid goblin. Now, the skirk prospector is going to allow you to sacrifice this goblin, because that's what skirk does, lets you sack goblins for red mana. And when you sacrifice the putrid goblin for a red mana, it goes into the graveyard, and its persist happens. It comes back and it gets a neg1 counter, but it also gets a +1 counter. So that cancels out. Now it's just a 2/2 with persist, and you have a red mana floating. Now you're going to sacrifice the putrid goblin to skirk prospector, and it's got persist, so it's going to come back, and it's going to get a neg1 counter, but your commander's going to put a +1 counter. They're going to cancel out, and you're just going to be right back where you started with a 2/2 goblin with persist and a skirk prospector that will allow you to sacrifice it over and over and over and over, adding red mana to your mana pool each time. So this gives you infinite red mana, and it also gives you infinite +1/+1 counters on all of your creatures. So if you've got a few dudes in play, maybe you've got an Aven Mind Sensor, a Blood Pet, and a Goblin Matron in play with your commander, you can buff them all. They keep getting +1 counters each time you go through this iteration, and then maybe just swing in and make everybody dead. Or you've got your Mayhem Devil in play, and you're sacrificing the putrid goblin over and over and over, and you burn the table out that way, because Mayhem Devil says anytime anyone sacrifices a permanent, that includes you sacrificing your putrid goblin, you get to start pinging people, any target. So you wipe all the battlefields, and then you burn everybody's faces, and then you have a table full of murdered people, and you have ruined the night. So the other thing is you have infinite mana. So if you don't have your Mayhem Devil, and you don't have enough creatures out to just make them all enormous and kill everybody, you could have, let's say, Cut to Ribbons. Cut is a spell that has, for 2 mana, deals 4 damage to target creature. But as it sits in your graveyard, you can cast it for its aftermath cost of black, and X. So if you've made a gazillion mana and you have 2 black, you can cast this out of your graveyard, and each opponent loses X life. So you can just murder the table that way. So that's one way, right? Or still sticking with these persist combos, if you have commander in play and you have skirk prospector or Viscera Seer, and Murderous Redcap. So you just really need your commander, the Murderous Redcap, and any way to sacrifice a creature for free. This also is a goblin, which means I can sacrifice it with Skirk Prospector, and it also means I can find it with Goblin Matron. So Skirk Prospector, Commander, and Murderous Redcap in play. Murderous Redcap, when it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to its power to any target, target creature or player. So you cast it, you burn somebody for 2, you sacrifice it with Skirk Prospector or Viscera Seer, and it comes back into play, and it gets the neg1, but it gets +1, just like the situation we were in before with the Putrid Goblin. This time it's the same thing, but this time we don't need a Mayhem Devil. We don't need to go infinite mana. We don't need any kind of an outlet. It is its own outlet. It is 4 mana, but it is its own outlet. So that's another one of the combo lines that you can use. But the main combo line turns out to be, boy, we've got lots of them. Because we've got Hoarding Broodlord. You can do some loops with that and Pinnacle Monk, or you can animate your Hoarding Broodlord and bring it back and saw it in half and make 2 of them and get Burnt Offering or Sacrifice and Peer into the Abyss and draw half your deck. Those are all things you can do. But the coolest, the thing that has been the most effective in my testing, far and away, has been World Gorger Dragon with either Animate Dead or Necromancy. So let's say we have we haven't even gotten to the point where we can play our commander out. Maybe we're on turn 2. We've got just a couple of lands out. Maybe we've got, let's say we have, doesn't really matter. Let's just say we've got Black Cleave Cliffs and a Plains. That's what we've got in play. We have a Dark Ritual. We've got Animate Dead in hand, and we've got World Gorger Dragon in the bin. So that could just look like we've got Entomb or Buried Alive, or we've got what's the newer one? Maybe we cast Unmarked Grave or Final Parting. Maybe we did cast our commander, and we had World Gorger Dragon in hand, and we used our commander to discard the World Gorger Dragon. Again, though, even if you don't have your commander in play, if you have the ability to put the World Gorger Dragon in your graveyard, and you've got an Animate Dead, so that only costs 2 mana to animate. So maybe you went turn 1, Dark Ritual. So turn 1 you went Dark Ritual, Buried Alive, put World Gorger Dragon in your graveyard, and turn 2 you cast Animate Dead, targeting the World Gorger Dragon in your graveyard. So Animate Dead is an enchantment that brings, it's an enchantment that you can enchant a creature in your graveyard with. The text is weird. It says, when you play Animate Dead, choose target creature card in any graveyard. When Animate Dead comes into play, put that creature into play, and Animate Dead becomes a creature enchantment that targets the creature. Enchanted creature gets -1. If Animate Dead leaves play, bury the creature. So the way this works is, when we Animate Dead the World Gorger Dragon, the World Gorger Dragon enters play, and it says, whenever World Gorger Dragon enters the battlefield, exile all other permanents you control. That includes your lands, but that also includes the Animate Dead. So you're going to tap all of your lands for mana and float the mana. You're going to exile the lands, and you're going to exile the Animate Dead. When you exile the Animate Dead, that's going to kind of drop the World Gorger Dragon back into the graveyard. When you drop the World Gorger Dragon back into the graveyard, the Animate Dead comes back into play looking for a target. Your lands come back into play untapped, because things just enter play untapped, unless it says otherwise on the card. So our lands come into play untapped. We've got mana floating. The Animate Dead is looking for something to do. It finds the World Gorger Dragon in the graveyard, and you animate it again. It comes out, it comes into the battlefield. It phases all your stuff out, but before it does, you tap your mana, you tap your lands, you tap your mana-producing permanents, you float the mana, and it just keeps happening. So the World Gorger Dragon comes in, and it phases out the Animate Dead. That makes the World Gorger Dragon leave, which phases the Animate Dead back in. That attaches to the World Gorger Dragon, brings it back, so on and so forth, over and over, until you have infinite mana. And you have to eventually stop the loop. So when you cast your turn 1 Buried Alive off of a Dark Ritual, just put any other creature into the graveyard, so that once you have 1 billion mana, you can target that creature that's in the graveyard and kind of end the loop. So that's how you get your infinite mana, and you can use your infinite mana while you're doing this loop. Maybe it's not obvious how Celeste is a World Gorger Dragon outlet to begin with. So when she's in play, if you exile her with the World Gorger Dragon's ability, and then the World Gorger Dragon leaves play, Celeste comes back into play. When she enters, You're going to discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards plus 1. Even if you've emptied your entire hand, you're still going to draw 1 card. And then you're going to flicker her again with the World Gorger Dragon, and she's going to disappear and reappear, and now you're going to discard the 1 card and draw 2 cards. And then you're going to discard 2 cards and draw 3 cards. And then you're going to discard 3 cards and draw 4 cards. And you can keep whichever cards you want in your hand. And then just keep putting the rest of the cards in your graveyard and keep drawing and keep discarding and drawing and discarding until you end up in a situation where you've got, say, most of or all of your deck in the graveyard, and you've got a gazillion mana, and one of the cards that will definitely be in the graveyard will be cut to ribbons, and you will be able to use your infinite mana to play a cut for ribbons, the ribbons part of cut to ribbons, for X equals 1,000,000 and burn all of your opponents to death. If somehow, I don't know, maybe you're cut to ribbons, maybe there's a blue player who has somehow, I don't know, mind break trapped this, or you went to burn his commander with the cut part and he dissipated it, whatever, it's exiled. If this thing gets Praetor's grasped, somebody thinks they're going to shut you off. If you don't have cut to ribbons, you do still have a backup that is definitely going to work. When you're going through the World Gorger Dragon loop and you're flickering your Celeste and you're stocking your graveyard up, you're going to eventually find Underworld Breach, and it's going to go into your graveyard. And I hear you saying, well, what good is it going to do me in my graveyard? How can I use the Underworld Breach to win the game if it's in the graveyard? Or maybe you keep it in your hand. But even if it's in your graveyard, you will also have Sevinne's Reclamation. And Sevinne's Reclamation is apparently a sorcery, that has flashback. And Sevinne's Reclamation says, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, you may copy this spell and may choose a new target for the copy. So the flashback cost is 5, white and 4, which is less than a quazillion, which is how much mana you're going to make with the World Gorger Dragon loop. So you're going to be able to use you're going to pay the flashback price for the Sevinne's Reclamation, and you're going to have it bring Underworld Breach back into play. And when it brings the Underworld Breach back into play, you're going to have access to your entire deck, and you're just going to use your infinite mana to cast doesn't matter, Mayhem Devil, and then you're going to cast a Skirk Prospector and a Putrid Goblin, and you're just going to keep sacrificing the Putrid Goblin and burn everybody out. Or you're going to cast your Dualcaster Mage and your Twin Flame. You're going to win with one of the ways we already discussed. Or what's another win line in the deck? You're usually going to be ending the game by Dualcaster Mage, Twin Flaming, and you can use Electro Duplicate, does the same thing. This one has flashback, so if you're early in the game and you have to discard Electro Duplicate to draw cards with your commander, you can flash this back later on in the game. When you have Dualcaster Mage in hand, you can cast the Dualcaster Mage in response to a flashed back Electro Duplicate. So you're going to end the game with Twin Flame or Electro Duplicate with Dualcaster Mage, or Murderous Redcap with Skirk Prospector or Viscera Seer, or Skirk Prospector plus Putrid Goblin plus Mayhem Devil, or Viscera Seer plus Putrid Goblin with Mayhem Devil in play. Or you could have your Murderous Redcap in play, and then start going through your World Gorger Dragon loop and flicker your Murderous Redcap in and out, and every time it enters the battlefield, it's going to burn the target player or creature of your choice, and so you'll flicker that over and over when you're going through your World Gorger Dragon loop and kill everybody that way. And the other way is you just make infinite mana and then cast your cut and then cast ribbons from the graveyard, X equals 1,000,000,000, and burn everybody out. We also have Abdel Adrian, which is just like World Gorger Dragon, except Abdel Adrian doesn't do lands. So in order to get the loop to work with your Animate Dead or Necromancy and Abdel Adrian, you just have to make sure that you've got enough mana rocks in play that you can generate infinite mana that way. So you just have to have rocks in play. Same thing, except you're not able to stock up mana from your lands. It's a little bit safer. It doesn't come into play and literally exile everything. It only exiles the things that you want it to exile. So this will only flicker the non-land permanents that you choose, because you're exiling any number of non-land permanents. The kind of problem with Gorger Dragon is that it doesn't give you a choice. It exiles everything. So when it ETBs, all of your stuff flickers. All of your stuff phases out. And so if somebody interacts at the wrong moment, you're going to get locked out of the game entirely. So I'd recommend that you cast the backside of Revel in Silence, or otherwise have some way of making sure your opponents can't interact with you. For instance, in Budget, all of your opponents are tapped out, and there's almost no free interaction that's going to give you any kind of trouble. So that's kind of the way the deck works. We've got a bunch of just synergistic pieces in the deck. We're first and foremost, I'd say, we are a graveyard deck. We are going to be stocking our graveyard to use Underworld Breach, and hopefully we're going to be stocking our graveyard with these win conditions like Hoarding Broodlord, Gorger Dragon, or Abdel Adrian. These are the ones that if we animate them, we're going to win the game. Gorger Dragon, you can do it right away. You need a little bit of setup with Abdel Adrian, and just the tiniest bit of setup with Gorger Dragon or with Hoarding Broodlord. The kind of, I don't know if it's the simplest way to win, but the way to win with Gorger Dragon that people are most familiar with, that maybe will be the easiest to explain, is going to be get your Hoarding Broodlord in the graveyard. Maybe you cast your Celeste and this was in your hand. You discard the Hoarding Broodlord, and maybe you drew into an Animate Dead. You cast the Animate Dead, animating the Hoarding Broodlord. Hoarding Broodlord says when it ETBs, you get to tutor for a card. You exile it face down, and you can cast it with Convoke. So the card you're normally going to find with Hoarding Broodlord will be Saw in Half. Saw in Half, you're going to cast the Saw in Half by tapping the Hoarding Broodlord and using 2 other mana, and it destroys target creature and makes 2 copies of it. Those token copies are going to still have the same converted mana cost as the original. They're copies, and that's just how copies work. Then when they ETB, so your 2 copies of Hoarding Broodlord ETB, you're going to get an extra tutor for each one. So one of them is going to tutor up Burnt Offering. Now this could also be Sacrifice, but say Burnt Offering is one of the 2 cards that you're going to tutor. The other card you're going to tutor is Peer into the Abyss. So Peer into the Abyss is 7 mana, target player draws half their deck and loses half their life, and you round up in each occasion. So if you have Hoarding Broodlord in play, you saw it in half, you make 2 copies, you end up with Peer into the Abyss is going to be what you find with one of those tutors. So your token copy is going to tutor up Peer into the Abyss. Your other token copy is going to tutor up, say, Burnt Offering. Then you're going to tap the token that one of the 2 tokens to Convoke cast your Burnt Offering. Burnt Offering is very similar to Sacrifice. This one you can use red. You can make red or black mana, but they're both basically the same card. It says sacrifice a creature, add that creature's casting cost in any combination of red and or black mana to your mana pool. Our Hoarding Broodlord has a casting cost of 8 mana, so will the tokens have. So you will Convoke cast your Burnt Offering, sacrificing with the Burnt Offering your token Hoarding Broodlord, the one that you tapped, to make 8 mana. Then you're going to Convoke cast the Peer into the Abyss by tapping the other token, so that's going to pay for one of the 7. Then you've got 8 mana from the Burnt Offering to pay for the other 6. you're going to draw half your deck with 2 mana floating. Not to mention what other mana rocks, rituals, and lands that you have in play. Draw half your deck, cobble together a win. There is another win line. I mean, there's lots of win lines. This is another one of these layered combo decks. But there's one in specific that's probably worth discussing here. So whereas Underworld Breach really is a really good win condition when we're using our Celeste as either a World Gorger outlet or an Abdel Adrian outlet, we can just win with our Underworld Breach. So let's just say we have cast a tutor. It's really easy for us to turn on Demonic Council. Delirium says if there are 4 or more card types among the cards in your library, it's a demonic tutor. So it's gonna be that. I mean, we're putting cards in our bin all the time. I've goldfished this a bunch. Demonic Council is just always turned on. I mean, not always, but it's almost always turned on. It's very easy to turn this on. So this is gonna be a demonic tutor for us. So we can demonic tutor for Underworld Breach. Cast the Underworld Breach, use the Underworld Breach to cast the Demonic Council again, and we can find Stitcher Supplier. Then we'll cast the Stitcher Supplier. It's going to mill 3 cards. Then we're going to exile those 3 cards to pay. We're going to use the 3 cards that Stitcher Supplier mills as fuel for Underworld Breach. Maybe I should read Underworld Breach. Underworld Breach says each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. The escape, so that means you can play it from your graveyard by paying its escape cost. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost plus you exile 3 cards from your graveyard. So if you have your Stitcher Supplier, you play it, that mills 3 cards. So now you're going to be able to use those 3 cards to cast something else. For instance, Culling the Weak. So we can use Culling the Weak to sacrifice Stitcher Supplier. That's going to add 4 black mana. Stitcher Supplier says that when it enters the graveyard, when it dies, you mill 3 cards. So when it ETBs, you mill 3 cards. And when it dies, you mill 3 cards. So with Underworld Breach in play, you're going to be able to cast this, mill 3 cards, cast Culling the Weak, targeting Stitcher Supplier, make 4 mana, put the Stitcher Supplier in your graveyard, mill 3 cards. And you can just keep doing that over and over and over until you mill into your cut to ribbons and then use the ribbons to murder everybody. Or it'll allow you to just sculpt a perfect graveyard. You're just going to be able to put all of your cards, you're going to mill all your cards into your graveyard. You're going mana positive, you're going card neutral. But if you start with 5 cards in your graveyard, then you can choose what 5 cards end up in your graveyard. And, one of them can be ribbons. And you can just murder everybody that way. Or you can have like a Dark Ritual and an Infernal Plunge and your Dualcaster Mage and your Twin Flame. Or it can be your Skirk Prospector and your Putrid Goblin or Murderous Redcap. So basically, Stitcher Supplier and Culling the Weak win the game with Underworld Breach. And that's a 3-card combo, but it's 3 cards we kind of want to play anyway. And it's not really a 3-card combo because the way we're going to play it, we're going to use a card to find Underworld Breach, then we're going to use the Underworld Breach to find the cards that we need to complete the combo. Capiche? Makes sense? Mausoleum Secrets ends up being a very good card in this deck, and maybe this would be the card that we use to... it has to be a black card. Mausoleum Secrets is a 2-mana instant. This is a good card, especially for budget, and especially for this budget deck. Search your library for a black card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Reveal it, put it in your hand. So it's an instant speed tutor. Let's say you have 2 creatures in your graveyard. It's going to allow you to tutor for any black card with CMC 2 or less. That could be your Putrid Goblin. That could be your Animate Dead, so on. And we've got some other things that we probably should talk about. We put a bunch of creatures in here that do have ETBs. Goblin Matron, Jaxus in a way, Hoarding Broodlord, Pinnacle Monk, which is part of our mana base, but also has the ETB of returning an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand if you play it as a 5 mana creature. You can use this to do Hoarding Broodlord shenanigans also. How are we doing on time? I don't know if we want to explain another big complicated. I kind of wanted to do some gold fishing. Moonblessed Cleric can ETB and search your library for an enchantment card. That can be Underworld Breach. That can be Animate Dead. The reason I'm mentioning these cards that have enter the battlefield abilities like Imperial Recruiter, Pinnacle Monk, Hoarding Broodlord, Dualcaster Mage, Goblin Matron, Murderous Redcap, Stitcher Supplier, Moonblessed Cleric. We've got a lot of them. The reason that I'm mentioning those is they make cards like Twin Flame and Electro Duplicate better, right? Because now, Saw in Half. So maybe, I don't know, an opponent casts some nasty spell that we want to have. Well, we can respond, if we've got our Dualcaster Mage in play, we can respond by casting a Saw in Half. Saw in Half targeting our Dualcaster Mage, and then we'll make 2 Dualcaster Mages, and one of them is going to copy the Saw in Half, and no, we're not going into that. That's, okay, so basically what I was getting at is you can Twin Flame your Dualcaster Mage for value, or you can Saw in Half your Dualcaster Mage for value. Let's go ahead. Alright, so there's another win line that you're going to be able to use with Dualcaster Mage and Saw in Half, with anything that if you cast it enough times, your opponents will all be dead. So we're going to cast Dualcaster Mage, we're going to Saw in Half, then the Dualcaster Mage is going to make 2 copies of itself, and one of those copies is going to copy the Saw in Half, which is going to whack a Dualcaster Mage, sawing it in half again. And you can keep doing that and put infinite Dualcaster Mages on the stack and then cast a Lightning Bolt, getting copied by infinite Dualcaster Mages, burning out all of your opponents. The same thing will work with Strike It Rich to make infinite mana. If you just happen to have a Mayhem Devil in play, you can sacrifice all of those and murder everybody. We've got Ghost Fire Slice. But also we've got those Saw in Half, Twin Flame, Electro Duplicate, Ephemerate are all in the deck to flicker our Celeste. So as we get into the late game or mid game, if we're drawing our Saw in Halves, we can cast the Saw in Half, targeting Celeste. Let's say you have 3 cards in hand. And you have your commander in play. You can cast Saw in Half on your commander. That's going to destroy the commander, and you're going to make 2 copies of the commander. They are going to die to state-based actions, but not until after you have discarded your 3 cards and drawn 4 cards, and then discarded the 4 cards and drawn 5 cards. So now we've just fully stocked our graveyard, and we've gotten 5 new cards. Okay, so that's the deck, guys. Jaxus is another way to copy all of these ETB creatures that we have, and it's also a way to make copies of, our commander. But one more thing, even if we don't have access to our commander, Jaxus can be the discard outlet if we draw into our Hoarding Broodlord and we don't have a way to get rid of it. So if we have Hoarding Broodlord or Abdel or World Gorger Dragon in hand, we can use our Jaxus to tap a red and it to discard the Hoarding Broodlord, for instance, to create a token that's a copy of our Imperial Recruiter, for instance, or our Moonblessed Cleric. And then we've made a copy of the Moonblessed Cleric, which will put our Animate Dead on top of our library. Now we've got the Hoarding Broodlord in the graveyard. Say we did this at Instep, and we also the Moonblessed Cleric copy would gain haste and this Blitz ability that when it dies, which will be at the end of the turn, you're going to draw a card. So this is just like tons and tons of value. Tons of layered, kind of easy win conditions, with a lot of interaction and a lot of tutors, and a lot of utility pieces. I'm pretty proud of this $100 build, if you couldn't tell. And really, we do have a lot of really good interaction. Our commander is a 4-power commander, and we're in red. So if you know anything about me and my deck builds, you know that I'm playing Bolt Bend. Very good interaction at this price point. Imp's Mischief, Braid, Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, one of my very favorites, Wear Tear. Yeah, Ephemerate can even be interaction. We can use it to blank removal. We've got a pretty robust tutor package, a pretty robust interaction package. Plenty of mana. We've got rocks, we've got rituals, we've got a nice mana base. Let's take a look at how this breaks down, actually. I think I did a good job with this. 56% of our lands will tap for black mana, 50% red. That's a good one. I don't think we've got time to do this. Maybe not for a first 7. Yeah, that one looks pretty sweet. I think this would get us everywhere we want to go. But we don't have time for that. Until next time, maybe I'm gonna, I'm gonna do another video goldfishing this deck right now. So leave it, comment, tell me in the comments that you want to see the second part of this video. But that's the deck. That's Celeste, Ruining the Night, Budget Edition. Until next time, word to your mothers, word to your fathers, word to your daughters and your mothers. East side until the day that I die, west side until the day that you die. East side until the day I die on the west side with you while you're dying on the east side. May all your outs be alive and all your pots be monsters. Namaste, over and out. Peace be with you and you. Not so much you, but definitely you. Namaste, nerds.